AITA for uninviting my aunt from my wedding after she made fun of my fiancé? I'm 28, and I'm engaged to the love of my life, James, 30. We've been together for 4 years, and I can honestly say that he's everything I've ever wanted in a partner. He's caring, funny, and he just gets me in a way that no one else ever has. We've had our share of struggles, of course, but we've always managed to work through them together. James and I got engaged last year during a trip to Paris. It was magical. I'll never forget the look on his face when he proposed. My heart literally melted. My family, on the other hand, hasn't always been as thrilled about him. My parents like him well enough, but they've always had some reservations. They're traditional, and James doesn't exactly fit their idea of the perfect son-in-law. He's a bit of a free spirit, more into his career and passions than trying to fit into some mold. But there's one person in my family who has always been a bigger issue when it comes to James. My Aunt Sylvia. Aunt Sylvia is my mom's sister. She's in her mid-50s, and I've always been very close to her. Growing up, she was my confidant. I went to her for advice, for support, and she always made me feel like I could trust her with anything. But as I got older, I started noticing things about her that weren't so great. Sylvia has always had a way with words. She's quick-witted, and some might call her charming, but I always felt like her humor could be a little sharp. She has a habit of making jokes at other people's expense. Nothing too cruel, but always poking fun. And she tends to be very opinionated. Growing up, I didn't mind because I thought she was just being funny. She was, after all, a grown-up and had a way of getting away with things that I couldn't. But when James and I got serious, things started to shift. Sylvia started making comments that were a bit more pointed, a little more uncomfortable. At first, I chalked it up to her being protective over me, but eventually, I realized it was more than that. She didn't like James. It wasn't outright hostility, but it was in the way she would comment on how different he was from the men I'd previously dated, always implying that I could do better. She didn't say it directly, but there was always a tone to her voice, a little sneer whenever she talked about him. "He's so relaxed," she'd say with a dismissive smile. Or, "Doesn't James want to settle down someday? He seems like the type who's always going to be just a little bit lost." I didn't let it get to me at first. I figured it was just her being Sylvia, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But over time, I started to notice how often she would bring up these little jabs. She would make fun of his job. He's in the arts, and she's very traditional when it comes to career choices. Or talk about how unpolished he seemed compared to my exes, who were more corporate types. At family gatherings, she would act like it was a big joke, but it didn't feel like one to me. James didn't say much about it, but I could tell it bothered him. He's not the type to get defensive, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes whenever Sylvia would make these offhand comments. He's the kind of person who would never argue or cause drama, so he would just brush it off, but I could tell it was eating at him. The tipping point came a few months ago. We had just finalized our wedding venue, and I was really excited to tell everyone. It was a beautiful place, an old, rustic barn on the outskirts of a city with a gorgeous view. James and I spent weeks picking out every detail. I was absolutely in love with the idea of having our wedding there, and I couldn't wait to share it with the family. I made sure to tell everyone at our next family dinner, expecting nothing but excitement and joy. But Sylvia's response caught me completely off guard. We were all gathered at my parents' house for a family dinner. It wasn't anything special, just your typical Sunday get-together with a few people chatting over a big meal. My sisters were there, my mom, dad, and of course Sylvia. I had been planning this moment for weeks, finally telling everyone about the wedding venue. I was so excited to see their reactions, especially Sylvia's, because she's always been someone I'd want to impress. So, after we finished dinner, and everyone was sitting around the table, I announced it. "We finally picked our venue for the wedding," I said, grinning. "It's this beautiful old barn. It has this rustic charm to it. We're really excited about it." There was a round of applause, and everyone seemed genuinely happy. My sisters were asking all sorts of questions about the date, the food, the decorations, but then Sylvia chimed in. "So," she began, tilting her head in that way she does when she's about to make a sarcastic remark, "what exactly made you pick a barn? It seems very James to me." At first, I thought it was just a harmless joke. I mean, it wasn't exactly the grand ballroom some people dream of, but James and I loved it. It felt like us. It was a personal choice, something that reflected our style. But Sylvia's tone wasn't light. It was sharp, like she was making a point. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. Well, we wanted something that felt a little more laid back. We don't need anything too fancy, you know? But Sylvia wasn't letting it go. Sure, but a barn? I guess I just thought you'd go for something a little more refined. You've always been into that polished, perfect look before. She shot a glance at James, her eyes narrowing just slightly. Seems like you're lowering your standards. The room went silent for a moment. I could feel my face flush, and I looked at James. He was smiling, but it wasn't his usual easy smile. There was a tension in his jaw, a tightness around his eyes. He didn't respond to Sylvia directly, but I could see the hurt in his expression. I tried to deflect. It's just a venue, Sylvia. You're overthinking it. We're just trying to do something different, something that feels right for us. But Sylvia wasn't done. I just don't know why you'd go for something so rustic. You don't want to look back in a few years and regret not having a more memorable wedding, do you? That was when the frustration hit me. Sylvia's comments were no longer just about the venue. It was as if she was questioning my taste, my judgment, and my relationship with James all at once. And for the first time, I realized that she wasn't just poking fun. She was trying to undermine me. James, still sitting beside me, let out a small, barely audible sigh. It's what makes us happy, he said quietly. He wasn't trying to make a scene, but I could tell he was tired of being the subject of Sylvia's thinly veiled criticisms. Sylvia didn't stop there, though. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze never leaving James. Well, I suppose it's your day, she said. But just remember, you don't have to settle for less. At this point, I felt my patience snap. Sylvia's insults had gone too far, and I could feel a fire building up in my chest. I'd let her slide by with her comments before, but this time, it was different. It wasn't about the wedding venue anymore. It was about her blatant disrespect for James. I wasn't going to let her keep tearing him down. Sylvia, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's enough. You don't get to talk about him like that. James is more than enough for me, and you need to stop making him feel like he's not. Everyone at the table fell silent. My parents were looking at me like they didn't know what to say. My sisters exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. Sylvia, though, seemed unfazed by my outburst. Well, I'm just saying, sometimes you have to be realistic, sweetheart, she replied coolly, giving me a look that could freeze water. I could feel the anger rising, but I bit my tongue. This wasn't the place to argue. But I knew, deep down, that this was the last straw. If Sylvia couldn't be supportive, then she didn't deserve a place in our lives. After that dinner, things felt tense. I could barely look at Sylvia without feeling a mix of anger and disappointment. I didn't speak to her for a few days after, and when I did, it was short, cold, and nothing like the closeness we used to have. James was supportive, of course, but I could tell he was still affected by what Sylvia had said. He didn't want drama, but I knew that he had been hurt, and he deserved better than the way Sylvia had treated him. It took me a few days to gather my thoughts, but finally I decided that enough was enough. Sylvia needed to be called out for her behavior, and she needed to understand that she couldn't continue to disrespect the person I was going to marry. I spent the next few days in a haze of frustration and confusion. My mind was racing. I knew I had to confront Sylvia, but I wasn't sure how. We've always been close, and the last thing I wanted was to cause a rift in the family. But her behavior had crossed a line, and I couldn't just sit back and let it slide anymore. Not when it came to James. I knew I couldn't avoid the conversation forever, so I decided to take the plunge. One evening, I called Sylvia. She picked up after the third ring. Hello. Her voice was cool, but there was a hint of surprise in it, like she wasn't expecting me to call. Hi, Sylvia, I said, trying to keep my tone calm. Can we talk for a minute? There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a small sigh. Of course. What's on your mind? I felt a pang of discomfort in my stomach, but I pressed forward. It's about what happened at dinner the other night. I've been thinking about it, and I really don't appreciate how you spoke to James. Or about our wedding. I think you owe him an apology." There was a moment of silence, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. I could tell she wasn't expecting me to bring it up like this. Sylvia had always been the one to call the shots, to be the one who set the tone in our family dynamic, but for once, I wasn't going to let her. "Amy, darling," she said after a beat, her voice dripping with condescension. "I wasn't trying to upset anyone. I was just being honest. If you can't handle honesty, maybe you should think about that." I felt my blood boil. "This isn't about honesty, Sylvia. This is about respect. And you crossed a line by belittling him like that. I've let you make fun of him for months, but that was too much. You can't keep making him feel small, and I'm not going to sit by and let it happen anymore." There was a long pause. I could feel the tension in the air, and I almost regretted calling. Maybe I should have let it go. But no, I knew I was right. I needed to stand up for James, for our relationship. I wasn't going to let her tear us down. Finally, Sylvia spoke again, this time with a noticeably colder tone. I didn't realize I was supposed to walk on eggshells around him now. What happened to the Amy who didn't take everything so personally? If you want to marry someone like him, that's your choice, but don't expect me to change my opinion just because you're in love. Her words stung, but I wasn't about to back down. This isn't about changing your opinion, Sylvia. It's about being respectful. James is a good man, and if you can't see that, then maybe you shouldn't be involved in our lives at all. He's my choice, and I won't let anyone treat him like that. I could hear her scoff on the other end of the line. "You're being dramatic. It's just a little harmless teasing. I didn't mean to upset anyone. You're acting like I insulted him personally." I wasn't buying it. "It's not about teasing, Sylvia. It's about you constantly undermining him. Your harmless teasing has turned into a pattern of disrespect. And I'm done with it." She was quiet for a while, and I could feel her processing what I said. Then finally she let out a sigh.
"Fine.
"I see you're not going to let this go," she muttered, her voice tinged with frustration. "I'll apologize to James. But honestly, I don't know if I'll ever understand why you're marrying him. He's not the man I would have chosen for you. But if this is what you want, then I'll respect your decision. I'll apologize and we can move on." That was it. No real remorse. No real acknowledgement of how her words had hurt. But I had to take what I could get. I had said what I needed to say, and I hoped that, at the very least, it would stop her from making any more hurtful comments. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the anger still simmering beneath the surface. "But if you want to be in my life, you need to stop undermining him. If you can't do that, then maybe we need some space." There was another long pause, and then Sylvia sighed again. "I'm not perfect, Amy. I don't always know how to keep my mouth shut. But I'll try. For you." I could tell that she wasn't fully sincere, but I appreciated the effort. I didn't know if things would change, but I was at least hopeful that we could move forward. After all, it was the best apology I was going to get from Sylvia. The next day, I told James about the conversation. He listened patiently as I recounted everything, and when I was done, he just nodded. "I'm glad you stood up for yourself," he said, wrapping his arm around me. "And for me." I smiled, but the tension was still there. I wasn't sure if things with Sylvia would ever be the same again. But I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let anyone make me choose between family and the person I loved. A few days passed after my conversation with Sylvia, and I honestly thought things would settle down. I was hopeful. Maybe this whole situation could be water under the bridge, a little blip in the grand scheme of wedding planning. After all, Sylvia had said she would apologize to James. I had to believe that this could smooth things over, even if the whole thing still felt a bit unresolved. I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt for now. James and I went on with our lives, preparing for the wedding. The pressure was starting to build, as it always does when the big day approaches. But something had changed in me. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It wasn't even about Sylvia's opinions on my fiancé. It was about the fact that I had allowed her to get away with treating us both poorly for so long, and that I had let it slide without confronting her sooner. I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not family, disrespect James like that again. Then came the night Sylvia called to apologize. She rang me up around 8 p.m., and I was sitting on the couch, flipping through wedding magazines. I saw her name on the screen, and a cold wave of apprehension washed over me. I didn't know what to expect. Was she going to backtrack on her apology? Was this going to be another round of gaslighting, telling me I was too sensitive? Hello. I answered, trying to keep my tone neutral. Amy, Sylvia's voice was softer than usual. I wanted to talk to you about the wedding. And, well, about what I said about James. I had to resist the urge to interrupt her. I just nodded even though she couldn't see me. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I did at dinner. It was wrong, and I can see that now. Her voice wavered slightly, which was unusual for her. I was hurt, I guess. I've always had a certain image of you and what your life would look like, and I think I was projecting that onto you. I didn't mean to attack James, but I did. And I'm really sorry. There was a pause as she let out a deep breath. I know I can't just take back what I said, but I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. For you, and for him. I took a moment to process her words. Was this sincere? Was this the apology I was waiting for, or was it just another way to shift the blame? But I had to admit, it sounded genuine. It wasn't a perfect apology, and it didn't erase the hurt, but it was something. I appreciate that, Sylvia, I said slowly, trying to choose my words carefully. I really do. But this isn't just about words. You can't just apologize and then keep treating James the same way. If you want to be a part of this family, you have to respect him. You can't keep undermining him and then expect everything to be okay just because you said sorry. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, a slight tension in the air, before she spoke again. I get it, Amy. I really do. I'll do better. I'll make it right. And I promise, I won't say anything like that again. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thank you, Sylvia. That's all I need to hear. We ended the conversation on a relatively peaceful note, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Sure, Sylvia had apologized, but apologies don't fix years of underlying issues. I had a lot of doubts about whether things could ever truly go back to normal. And there was still a nagging worry in the back of my mind. What if she didn't really mean it? What if this was just a temporary attempt at peace? The days leading up to the wedding were a blur. Between finalizing details with the venue, confirming guest lists, and ensuring everything was on track, I barely had time to think about Sylvia. But as the big day approached, I found myself dreading the inevitable moment when she would show up at the ceremony. James and I had made it clear that we wanted the wedding to be as stress-free as possible. We had a tight-knit guest list, close friends and family, and we didn't want any drama. But as we got closer to the day, it became apparent that things weren't quite as peaceful as I had hoped. 1 week before the wedding, Sylvia called me again. This time, there was no apology in her voice. There was just coldness. I don't know if I'll be able to make it to the wedding, she said flatly. I froze. What? Why? She let out a sigh, as if she'd been waiting for me to ask. Well, I've been thinking. The wedding seems a bit too much. Too casual for my taste. I just don't know if I can be a part of something so low-key. My stomach dropped. Was she seriously going to pull this on me now after everything we had been through? What are you talking about? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We've been planning this for months, Sylvia. This isn't some impromptu thing. We've been clear about what we wanted, and you said you'd respect that. She didn't seem fazed. I know, but I just feel like it's not my style. I don't want to cause a scene or anything, but I don't know if I can be there. I was silent for a moment, trying to process her words. It felt like I was stuck in a nightmare. Are you seriously telling me that after everything, you might not show up because of the wedding style? Her response was icy. I think you and James should be realistic about your expectations. You can't force people to like what they don't like. And honestly, I'm not sure this wedding is for me. I felt a sharp pang of anger. After everything I'd done to try to make peace with her, after giving her the benefit of the doubt, this was what I got? You know what, Sylvia? I said, voice trembling. If you can't show up and support us the way we've asked, then maybe it's better you don't come at all. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, And as soon as they did, I realized they were the truth. I couldn't keep dragging myself through this emotional roller coaster for someone who clearly didn't care about me or James. She was silent for a long time, and I half expected her to hang up. But she finally spoke. "I'll think about it," she said curtly, and then hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling both relieved and exhausted. I had just made a decision that, honestly, I had been avoiding for months. But I knew it was the right one. Sylvia had been given a chance to be a part of my life, to be a part of James's life, and if she couldn't respect that, then it was time for her to go. The morning of the wedding dawned, and everything felt surreal. I woke up to the smell of flowers and the soft hum of quiet conversations as my bridal party helped me get ready. I was surrounded by people who loved me, people who had supported me through thick and thin, and who were genuinely excited about the day ahead. There was no drama. There was no tension. It was just pure joy, and for the first time in a while I felt like everything was falling into place. The ceremony was everything I dreamed of. The barn, which had seemed so small and intimate when we first visited, was transformed into a magical space. Soft twinkling lights lined the walls, and candles flickered on every table. The vows James and I exchanged were heartfelt, emotional, and real. There was no one in the world I'd rather marry than him. And as we walked down the aisle, hand in hand, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. This was my choice. This was my future. And nothing, not even my aunt's opinions, could take that away. In the days following the wedding, I felt both elated and exhausted. Everything had gone off without a hitch, and I couldn't have asked for a more perfect day. But there was still the matter of Sylvia's absence. I wasn't angry at her anymore, but I couldn't ignore the fact that her decision had hurt me. I had hoped she would come around, that maybe she'd surprise me and show up, even if just to be there for the ceremony. But in the end, she didn't. I wasn't sure what the future held for us. I didn't know if Sylvia and I could ever repair our relationship. There was too much baggage between us now. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to put my happiness on hold for someone who wasn't willing to support me in the way I needed. As the days turned into weeks, I began to distance myself from the idea of forcing her to change. Maybe she never would. Maybe she couldn't see what James meant to me, and maybe that was something I'd have to accept. But I no longer felt like I had to carry the weight of that disappointment. James and I settled into married life with ease. We were more in sync than ever, laughing about the silly things, discussing our future plans, and building the life we had always wanted. Sylvia's absence was felt, of course, but it didn't overshadow the joy that surrounded us. Then, a few weeks after the wedding, I received another message from Sylvia. This time, it wasn't a cold or distant text. She actually reached out to talk. "Amy, I've had some time to think. I'm sorry for not being there for you on your big day. I wasn't the person I should have been, and I regret not supporting you the way I should have. I hope one day we can talk and work through this. You deserve that. I know you may not want to hear from me right now, but I hope we can reconnect." I read the message several times, trying to process it. This was the first time I had seen any real remorse from her. And while part of me still felt hesitant, guarded, even, I couldn't help but feel a small flicker of hope. Maybe there was a chance for a reconciliation. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to think about it. But in my heart, I knew that if Sylvia was willing to try and make things right, I would at least be open to hearing her out. Months later, I did meet with Sylvia. We sat down for coffee, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were talking as equals. She admitted that she had a lot of growing up to do, and I acknowledged that I had allowed her behavior to go on for too long without standing up for myself. We didn't resolve everything in one conversation. It would take time. But that's the thing about family. You don't just give up on them, even when they make mistakes. You give them a chance to learn, to grow, and to prove that they can do better. As for me and James, we were stronger than ever. We had weathered the storm together, and nothing felt more right than being able to say, "I do,"